Hello, everyone.
Hi there, folks.
This is Amanda.
And this is Rita.
And you're listening to
I Don't Know Her,
the podcast where we talk about women and some other people.
That you haven't heard of.
And now you will.
Alrighty.
So, murder shows.
Murder show. Okay, I was scrolling last night and I saw this really funny SNL clip of, it's like the montage that they've been doing for years.
The digital shorts.
The digital shorts where they turn it into like a music video. One of my favorite ones is Sex at Mom and Dad's House over the holidays. But this one was about murder shows.
Yep. Well, it was about how lots of women like to relax.
Yeah.
And it's by watching horrific murder shows.
Yeah, like this is my downtime while I'm painting my toenails and having some pizza or folding laundry. You know, and I feel like a lot of people out there can relate, myself included.
Yeah, I do watch a lot of murder shows, although I do it with my wife, so I don't do it when I'm alone.
I do it when I'm alone all the time.
You know why? Because I can't. Because if I watch one alone, she gets pissed.
Oh.
You know, that's a thing people don't talk about marriages. Constantly fighting over what you get to watch when you're alone and not get to watch. So basically, I can't watch anything.
Yeah, we have the same thing of like, ours was Breaking Bad and Vikings, where we absolutely were like, if you watch this,
we're getting a divorce.
I am going to fucking kill you. Yeah. There's other stuff where it would be like, well, you fell asleep and I finished an episode and a half-ish. Two.
And then you have to go back and watch by yourself, which you never can find the time to do.
No.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's the thing that bothers me is like, okay, well then just tell me what the fuck happened because I'm not going to be able to watch it. So the digital short Rita shared, I then watched it and felt seen.
I felt called out as fuck.
Yeah. But it reminded me that last night we were watching a murder show. We stumbled upon on Hulu the ID Network show called The 1990s, The Deadliest Decade. Which has a...
This is on Hulu?
It is.
I know what I'm watching tonight.
Yeah, although here, maybe you won't. We watched the first episode the other night, and that one was like classic murder show, right? It was about this woman who'd been murdered in her home, and she and her husband were like super wealthy, but they were in the middle of this divorce. So it's like had all of the callings of like a great murder show. And because it's about the 90s, like they throw in all of these like 90s references, and I'm a 90s kid, so I love this kind of stuff. You know, it just makes me like nostalgic in a way that's very wholesome to me. And their logo like looks like the Unsolved Mysteries logo from the 90s.
Yeah.
It's very neat. So that first one was like, great. The second episode, which is the one we watched last night, was about a really tragic case of a 12-year-old girl who gets murdered by some older teenage girls.
Oh my goodness.
And it's just like, that's just sad when it's always sad when children murder children.
Yeah.
Like, you don't need to make it any bigger than that. That's already a pretty terrible, sensational thing to be talking about. And I think anytime girls murder girls, there's always like a layer of like, what went wrong?
Yeah. Everybody always seems to look in the wrong place when it comes to things like that.
And I was asking Rita before we started if she remembered the Satanic Panic from the 90s. So I'd love for you to explain for the people who maybe missed it or were not old enough. What was the Satanic Panic about?
All parents were triggered. They thought Satanism was going to take over their children's lives. Definitely from what I remember seeing this like on 60 Minutes or something, where the host was like playing Marilyn Manson lyrics to parents, and they were like, oh, it's like a panel of parents and they're covering their mouths and they're shocked that their children are listening to this and that they're being corrupted, and therefore using Marilyn Manson as a reason of why their kids are messing up or are depressed or are, you know, and I remember when Columbine happened. I mean, that was 1991, maybe?
No, that was, I think my freshman year of high school.
And what year was that?
So I think that was 96. 97 or 8.
97. Okay. Was way off on that one. I remember the same thing. It was like, what were these boys into?
They wore black trench coats.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And which was so not the reason.
Probably the most famous case of using the satanic panic as actual evidence in a court trial. The most famous has to have been the West Memphis 3. Do you remember that case?
Not really.
That's honestly the case that got me really into true crime in general, because they made a series of documentaries about it in the late 90s and early aughts. It was about these 3 teenage boys, one of whom was this boy named Damien, who wrote really dark poetry and listened to Metallica and wore black.
Okay.
That was the evidence they used, that he was the ringleader of a group of boys who ritualistically and satanically murdered 3 children.
This sounds familiar now. Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure you've heard of it. It was in West Memphis, Arkansas. 3 little boys were killed and found in the woods, and they had been hog-tied.
Yeah, it was very graphic.
It was terrible. And they convicted 3 teenagers of this crime with no physical evidence. They had eyewitness testimony that was later recanted. They had one of the boys was actually out of town at a baseball game, and lots of people could vouch for the fact that this kid was at a baseball game, and they still convicted him. And Damien was supposedly this ringleader, and they in court read his poetry as actual evidence of him being part of like a satanic cult. And the reality is like none of that actually existed. There wasn't like some, rampaging satanic occult thing happening across the country. What there was a lot of really shoddy journalism and really shoddy law enforcement techniques that were like, look at this little mark here. That's the mark of Satan. And it was like,
really?
It was like animals ate that kid. He was in the woods. So this episode last night really, my problem is that we have hindsight and we now understand that that was a moral panic and it had no basis in reality or fact. We're in the middle of a moral panic right now over human trafficking, which is like, people are throwing out these numbers like, 2,000 children are trafficked every year. And it's like, really?
2,000?
The number is actually even wilder than that. It's like 20,000. I was like, do you know we would run out of children? Real fast, we would run out of children if that's how many fucking children are being trafficked every year. So this show was about this little girl, right, who was 12 when she got murdered. But here's the catch, Rita. She had moved to a public school.
Oh no.
Step number 1, public school. 2, a girl named Amanda, who was like the grade above her. She was 14, and she was an open lesbian.
Oh no.
Had showed an interest in her, and the 2 of them had started dating. And it's like middle school.
Okay.
Middle school.
Okay.
So
this so far does not seem...
Yeah, but it's the 90s, and lesbianism is as close to witchery as you can get. And on top of that, Amanda had dated another girl before this little girl, Shanda. They all have NDA names at the end. Amanda, Shanda, and Melinda. Okay. So the older girl, the other girl that she had dated was older than her. So we're talking about a 16-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 12-year-old.
Okay.
So they're all 2 years apart. The older girl, Melinda, used to date Amanda, and then they broke up, but she's like still super jealous and found out the 2 of them were dating and was like really upset.
Okay.
In the meantime, Shanda had her grades kind of drop, and her mom was just like, I don't care if she's a lesbian, but not with Amanda. And took her out of public school and put her into another Catholic private school. Okay. And then supposedly she just miraculously improved now that she wasn't around this Amanda character. Okay. Who, again, we don't hate that she's a lesbian. No. We just hate that she's Amanda. It was very weird. And then this Melinda girl, I don't know if she just didn't know they had broken up or what, but her and her friends from they go to high school.
Mm-hmm.
They went to this girl's house, Shanda's house, and told her that Amanda wanted to meet with her. Amanda apparently didn't know anything about this.
Okay.
But they used her as bait. And they said, Amanda wants to talk to you. So Shanda left with these girls at like midnight, and they took her up to this old structure that I don't know what it was there for, but it was nicknamed the Witch's Castle.
Okay.
And they murdered her there. And it was pretty horrific. They did terrible things to her. And instead of it being about like, this is a terrible thing that happened, these 3 teenage girls killed this little girl, terrible, it became like about a lesbian witchery cult who worshipped Satan. It was so weird. I was like, it's already sensational.
Why does it have to have that spin on it? Which also takes away from the fact that, yes, this is a murder. There is facts, and obviously there is evidence. Did the girls eventually confess that they did do this?
One of the girls who didn't really know that this was going to happen, she'd got in the car with her friends, and they
probably
were like,
thought this was going to be, we're going to scare her.
Yeah, we're going to scare her. We're going to teach her a lesson.
Yeah.
And then like witnessed everything. And she went to the cops and was like shaking and crying, was like, this is what happened.
Okay.
And almost immediately, it was like, I think it was the next day.
I don't understand why it has to have that spin.
I especially don't understand why we're making a show in the year 2020 and 2021
about this,
where I don't mind if they touched on that and said in the middle of the 90s we were in the full-on panic about kids being lured in by Satanism. That was true. That really happened. People were afraid of that. But that's not what the show did. The show legitimized that was a real thing. And that's the thing I had a problem with.
Yeah.
I was like, these kids were not involved in satanic cult. That didn't happen. It didn't exist. Did they listen to like dark music and write dark poetry? Sure, everyone did. It was the 90s.
Yeah, it was the style.
Yeah, it's literally, that was our culture.
Yeah.
I don't know anybody who didn't at some point write dark poetry.
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hands are raised.
I listened to, sad, depressing music, wrote sad, depressing songs and poems. And
it was a mood. It was
our whole culture.
Yes, it was.
We were basically
it was the clothing.
It was entire emo culture.
Yeah. Just how the mood of like, I guess you would say like, and the style and the culture of disco.
Yeah. That was our actual culture, was listening to really depressing music and being depressed as a culture.
Yeah.
And to me, it was just like so irresponsible to have this show present this information as though it was factual. All of the girls who were involved in the murder were convicted. And all of them have now been released on probation and parole. The girl who was like the spearhead, right? The one who was the ex-girlfriend who had sort of come up with all of this stuff.
Yeah.
She, in court, it was presented that her upbringing was horrific.
Ooh. Like
really, really bad. I will not get into it because it's very triggering. But that seems to me like a much bigger reason why someone would not have the boundaries or stop button in a situation like this. They'd had their own body violated in horrific ways, so why not do it to somebody else? I just think that is a much better and more important topic to discuss when we're talking about murder.
That's
and crime.
not as exciting though.
You're right. It's not as sensational as a lesbian witch cult.
Exactly. So when I actually was studying criminal justice when I was in college, because this is going to make you laugh, I wanted to be a cop.
Yikes.
Yeah, I did. So one of my courses was to study serial killers. And so we went through this entire, our whole book was I would say probably about 80 to 100 cases that we had to study. And so some were like really, really in depth, the hot names were in there, Jeffrey Dahmer, things like that. But then there was a section of children who murdered children. I had to put the book down numerous times because that was really hard to get through. But often not, I would say like 85% of the time, it was children who had been, like you said, this girl
had been horrifically abused. And had witnessed horrific abuse.
Yes.
Like literally had no idea how real people should interact with each other. Mm-hmm. Like there was no way she had any concept of like healthy, normal relationships. Like everything she ever saw was beyond the pale. Like it's not surprising then that she didn't have the like ability intellectually or emotionally to understand that like this is obviously she logically knew it was not acceptable to murder somebody. Mm-hmm. But if you have seen your whole life and experienced personally that the way someone expresses disappointment or frustration or whatever, or anger, is through bodily harm, then maybe that's what you'll do. Mm-hmm. Like, it's not a hard leap.
No, it's not at all.
It's definitely not Satan.
It's like it's right in front of them, but no, we're going to go behind that and we're going to pull this rabbit out of this hat and we're going to say this is the evidence.
And you know why? You know why that is?
What do you think?
Because it's so much easier to blame some outside problem than it is to look inward.
Absolutely. 100%. You said that perfectly, because and then if you have to look inward, that takes work.
Yeah.
And so Satan and all this other crazy stuff over here, that is over there. And I can control this and not allow my kids to listen to that music. And they're not going to wear black trench coats.
Mm-hmm. If we make the boogeyman outside instead of our own society that has allowed these children to be abused in such horrific ways that they don't have moral compasses, mm-hmm. then we get off. We get to get off. We don't have to worry about it or feel guilty about it or feel shame about how we allow these children to be treated. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing about the satanic panic and all moral panics. Anytime we have a moral panic, it almost always stems from the fact that we want to blame whatever societal ill is happening on something outside of our control.
So parents don't have to look at themselves and wonder, what am I not doing as a parent?
Yeah. What am I overlooking?
Mm-hmm. So is this why you like murder shows? I feel like you guys just got a glimpse of how deep we go into this.
Yeah.
And, I like to watch these shows because I also really like the science behind it. Mm-hmm. Because I'm a bit of a science bug. I like that. I like the work that it takes and the thought process to solve crime.
Mm-hmm. I like definitely seeing the inner workings of the process. Mm-hmm. I think there's also, I read something somewhere about how, women and other marginalized identities are the largest consumers of true crime. And that often is, you would think, counterintuitive, because also the majority of true crime is about women being murdered. Mm-hmm. And I would say that that's not actually counterintuitive. It's like anytime you're walking around in a feminine body, you're at risk. Mm-hmm. Like walking down the street every single day is just a risk that you'll be murdered, heckled, harassed,
targeted,
insulted.
Yeah.
It's just, that's how you live your life. Mm-hmm. And I don't know a person who's not in a feminine body, or a person who's in a feminine body that has not contemplated their fate, like their mortality, every time they have to go for a run. Oh yeah. Or walk alone at night.
Oh, I dread walking to my car at night from work. Yeah.
Because we already know what the worst is. We know what could happen. And I think there's something almost a little bit comforting in being in watching something where the worst does happen. Mm-hmm. Because you're like, okay, I'm not crazy. That is what happens. Mm-hmm. And we have a lot of proof of it. So I think there is some comfort in that in a weird way.
Interesting.
I also like seeing crimes get solved.
Me too.
I think that I'm struggling right now in being in that place of cognitive dissonance where I truly believe that law enforcement has gone awry and probably, and I know always kind of has been. And at the same time, watching shows where the good guys are supposed to be law enforcement.
Yes, especially now.
Yeah. But I think it's also really important to then have references like the West Memphis 3, where law enforcement just completely botched a murder investigation and sent 3 innocent young men to prison who are now no longer in prison. They were let out on an Alford plea, which is a bullshit mechanism of our justice system, where the justice system says, we'll let you out as long as, you admit you're guilty. So that's what they had to do to get out, even though they weren't guilty.
No.
But it means, and that also means that no one will ever investigate what really happened to those children. So no one wins.
Yeah, and somebody who murders 3 children doesn't just stop.
That's right. Although, actually, sometimes they do. Sometimes they do stop. That's another myth that law enforcement perpetuates, but actually isn't borne out in fact. Lots of killers continue to kill. Other killers stop. And there also is no such thing as an MO. Like, some people kill the same way all the time. Some people don't.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's what another reason why I like watching shows like that is like, you'll often find the ones that are well done and smart, unlike this Deadliest Decade show, they'll really kind of expose some of these problems in the underbelly of our law enforcement system and also our judicial system, and sometimes in our social, like our society, what we're talking about and how we talk about crime. Apparently we've turned into a true crime show. Welcome to I Don't Know Her, the podcast where we talk about true crime. Like everyone else on the entire internet.
The entire podcast
world.
Nation.
Yeah.
Oof.
All right, let's move off true crime. Let's talk about women.
Okay.
I have a good one.
You do?
I do. It's someone that I am shocked I did not know about. And also confused for someone else. Kind of.
Oh, okay.
Do you know who Belva Ann Lockwood is?
No. Belva?
Belva.
Well, that's a very strong name.
I know, it's like vulva. Folks, you came here for vulva. Let's be honest. Okay.
Can't be the first time we've dropped that, has it?
I think the word vulva, probably. That sounded odd. Okay. Are you ready? Belva was an attorney, educator, activist, and the first woman to run for president of the United States of America.
What?
That's right. Okay. Belva Ann Bennett was born on October 24th, 1830.
Oh.
That's a long time ago.
Long time ago.
In a log cabin in Royalton, New York, which was a small town in Niagara County. Belva was the second child to parents Hannah and Louis Bennett, and the couple ended up having 5 children altogether, 4 girls and 1 boy. Belva's family ran a farm, and of course, all of the children helped out on the farm.
Of course.
And Belva was like real into it.
Love the farm life.
Liked playing in the mud, liked getting dirty. And that was sometimes criticized because that's very unladylike. She was also really interested in change. Like, how do you make change? She went to church, studied the Bible. One time she tried to walk on water. Because in the Bible it said, if you believe in God enough, you can walk on water. So she thought.
So she's like, okay, let's try it.
Yeah, and she just fell in the mud. And then another time, she was like, okay, well, I'm going to start smaller than that. And there was another Bible verse about how if you have enough belief in God, you can move mountains.
She tried to move a mountain?
No, she started much smaller. She just started with a hill. And nothing happened.
Okay.
But I think it's important to note that that was a characteristic of her as a small child. Like her desire to change something. So farm kids, she's a farm kid, right? Farm kids in school sometimes don't mix very well because they're often gone because of harvesting and planting. And
oh, yeah.
So many kids that are from older than age 8 basically just miss large swaths of time at school. Belva didn't really have that problem, but she was in charge of taking care of the farm animals, so sometimes she did have to miss school. But in general, she was like a book nerd. That was her thing. She loved being in school. She was really good at school. She was good at every subject. which I find impressive.
Nice. Seems to have a lot of gumption.
She does. But customary at the time, public school was only available to 8th grade.
Okay.
If you wanted to continue education past 8th grade, you had to go to a private academy, which obviously cost money. And it just wasn't a thing girls did.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe girls from rich, wealthy families, but not just your everyday farm kid.
Education's always an access to people with money.
So her family was like, nope, that's not what you're going to do. But she really wanted to continue her education. Her dad was especially against it. He thought that girls who got an education were like kind of funny in the head, like, you know, kind of loose in the head.
Okay.
And he called them old maids. They turned into old maids.
Oh, because women who seek an education are undesirable.
Yeah, I guess.
Okay.
I think there's a whole lot of factors in there, but that's one of them. And side note, Belva's parents, they got married when her mother Hannah was 15 and her dad was 20.
Okay.
Belva was their second child and Hannah was 18 when she had her.
Yikes.
So like their idea of like old maid was like if you turn 20. You know what I mean?
Yikes.
Like Belva's 14 when she finishes 8th grade. And I think he's like, all right, let's get you on the horse.
Yeah.
Let's get you married.
Well, 15. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it would be wild to only be like 14 years older than your children. Like that's really close in age.
Yeah, really young.
You know, you're 28 when they're 14.
Yeah. My cousin was 30 and her daughter's 15.
Yeah, you feel much closer to them in age at that point. So eventually, though, Belva did convince her dad that she should be allowed to go to school if she could pay for it on her own. So at age 14, she became a teacher.
Really?
Yeah, she went to the board of trustees for the local school and asked to get a summer school teaching job. And she had come highly recommended by is a one-room schoolhouse, by the teacher that she'd had who said, yeah, you know, she's really capable.
Nice.
So she got her first job as a teacher at the little local school and taught farm boys who had missed out on school. Mm-hmm. She earned $5 a week, and that's what she used to pay her first year's tuition at the Girls Academy in Royalton.
So not only is she working, now she's going to school.
Well, so she worked summer school, and now she's going to go to school at the academy.
Okay.
But she couldn't, like, that covered her tuition, but she still needed to pay for her room and board. So she actually worked as a housekeeper in the boarding house in order to pay for her room and board, to partially pay for it.
That's what we call work study nowadays.
Yeah. She repeated this every summer for the next 3 summers to pay for her to go to school. She graduated in May 1848, and shortly after that, she married a young man, a farmer named Uriah McNall. And they moved together to a slightly larger town in upstate New York called Gasport. He owned a home and he ran a sawmill business there. And Belva helped out with that, in addition to running her home. They had a daughter together on July 31st. That's my birthday. 1849. Her name was Laura, Lura, which I think is a cool name.
Yeah.
And I was like, no doubt her dad was probably relieved. She turned out okay.
Yeah.
Even with an education.
Even with an education, she still got married. Woo!
Because she had a good education, though, that made her a really great asset to Uriah in his business. She was really good at math, and she knew a lot, so she could, like, keep up with men and talk to them in a way and, like, convince them to go lower on prices and things like that. So she helped out with sales, and she was their bookkeeper.
Wow.
And she then, at home, like, ran the whole show, right?
Nice.
Did all of the cleaning and the laundry and the cooking and the blah, blah, blah.
She doesn't sound too loose in the head.
Right. It seems that everything was, like, just right. Like, this is where she's supposed to be. But it wouldn't be I Don't Know Her without a tragedy.
Oh, no. Who died?
Shortly before the daughter's second birthday, her husband Uriah was in an accident at the sawmill.
Oh.
One of his feet got caught in the machine, and then the whole thing of logs crushed him.
Oh, my gosh.
He did not die, but he was body was broken.
Yeah, crushed.
So he got like brought home, and Belva had to like take care of him, like everything. He couldn't move, he couldn't get up, he couldn't do anything. She had to basically be his nurse, take care of their 2-year-old, and run the farm and the sawmill.
That's a lot.
Yeah, she had a lot on her plate. And even though he ended up having his bones, they healed, and he wasn't 100%, but he could like still work some. But he was really, really, really weak. And I think the accident had just weakened everything in him, you know, because they didn't have the kind of medicine we do.
No, there was probably some internal damage that they couldn't take care of.
That's what I was thinking. He contracted tuberculosis and died after he had supposedly recovered. He died on April 8th, 1853. He was only 28.
Oh, that's young.
She's 22, and now she is a single mom at a time when women were not allowed to have a job, except for teaching, which is fine, but we'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
She also was like, I want to get a real job, so I want to have like an education, because that's how you get a job like a man does. So she enrolled at Gasport Academy. She was an exceedingly clever person. So in order to pay her tuition, she got a small house and made it into a boarding house. She rented out rooms to some of her own family members who came to live with her, and to students at the academy. So she kept up the home and cooked the meals for them, and in return they paid rent, which meant she could pay her tuition and take care of her daughter.
What happened to the sawmill? Did she have to give it up?
She sold this. So, side note, women were not allowed to own property, and so therefore they weren't allowed to buy or sell property.
Okay.
So even though her husband was no longer there, and that supposedly left her the business, it actually ended up belonging to his father.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
So thankfully, it seems like her father-in-law wasn't a dick, because together they sold it, and so she got
Partial.
a portion of the proceeds and paid off her debts, and then was able to buy this little boarding house. But it is important to note that women were not allowed to inherit property, because that's going to come up later.
Okay.
Belva was also very industrious, as we've already seen. And I don't know how she could juggle and manage as much as she did. I do know that it seems like her family was pretty close. Because I said that like family is what moved into her boarding house. Like she would have just like a rotating throughout the story, you're just kind of like rotating siblings and things like that come to live with her. So I think that's kind of neat, actually. Because it goes against what we, I think, in American society think of like the nuclear family. Like you grow up with your siblings and your parents, and then you move on and have your own wife and children or whatever, and ne'er the twain shall meet.
Yeah.
So I like that they like were always in and out of each other's life and living together in extended family situations.
Yeah.
So she had her sights set on a real college. She wanted to go, like, she's already done this Royalton School Academy. She did her 8th grade education, did this Royalton Academy, did this stuff at Gasport Academy, which was kind of like a repeat of what she'd already done. And she was like, I need something more. College.
Yeah.
I want to get a college degree. So that's what she set her sights on. But she didn't have enough money at the time. She was a widow, single mom, running this boarding house. So she returned to the district that she had taught in before and asked for a real job, a full-time job, not a summer school job. So she was hired as a full-time teacher, but the district offered her the same wage that she was making the last summer that she was teaching. And that was before she had like gone back to school and gotten some money under her belt. Yeah, I don't love that. So she was making $7 an hour. And she found out shortly after being hired that her wage was half of what the male teachers of her same level experience were being paid.
Bullshit.
So they're getting paid $14 an hour as their first year. And she's
been in the game for a minute.
Yeah, exactly. So Belva was like, how do I change this? How do I convince the school board to pay me more? She went to this popular minister's wife, like really influential in the community. And she was hoping that this woman would be like, this is outrageous. I'm going to speak on your behalf. But instead, this woman was like, this is just the way it is. And she was just like shocked.
Yeah.
She just didn't anticipate that like everybody would be like,
that someone just said SOL. Like,
yeah,
yeah, you're
this
shit
is
out of
just
luck.
how it is.
Yeah.
You just don't get paid as much. This is how it is. So she didn't like that at all.
I wouldn't either.
She was really pissed, and it would stick with her for a long time. This, like, which was an indignity. But she did her job reluctantly, saved her money.
Begrudgingly.
And she enrolled at the Genesee Wesleyan Seminary School. So seminary we think of now as like a religious school.
Yeah.
But at the time, that was what the name was for girls' schools. They were called seminaries.
Mm-hmm.
So as a girls only, there was like co-ed was like unheard of. You didn't have boys and girls together in school. And it was connected to the actual college, Genesee College in Lima, New York. So this is nowhere near where she lives. And there's just no way that she would be able to afford to go to college. And at this time, when you went to college, everybody lived on campus, and you never lived like, if you did live off campus, you lived in like a boarding house across the street. Mm-hmm. And it's just not the place that you bring a child. So after some really tough conversations, she has convinced her parents to take her daughter.
Okay.
And raise her for the next couple of years while she goes to college.
And her parents are probably only in their, early 40s?
Oh, yeah. They're
late 30s.
Let's see here. It's like, I think it's like 1855, maybe.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's like 1855. So she's only 25.
Yeah.
And so they're only like 40.
They're not even 50 yet. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not even 50. So she did leave Laura with her mother. Her dad was like not for this at all, but her mom was like, just, it was pretty supportive and was like,
yeah.
just let her do this. This is, and so the speculation is that he finally probably agreed to it because he understood that like as a widow, she needed to have opportunities in order to take care of her family. And this was actually considered really scandalous for her to leave her daughter with her parents and run off to get an education. It was very like,
gasp,
clutching some pearls. Within a few weeks of arriving at the seminary school, she was like, once again, this is not challenging enough for me.
I just see her like slam her pencil on her desk and be like, this is horseshit.
It is horseshit. So she went straight to the president and said, I want to transfer into the real college, Genesee College, which later became Syracuse University.
Oh.
So the president was like, you won't be able to handle that, little girl. It's way outside your league. And she was like, fuck you. Give me another college. And she persisted and he relented and she was able to enroll into the real college. And she was on cloud nine and she pushed herself really hard. She was in like electrochemistry and political economics.
Holy shit.
She took a whole course on the U.S. Constitution and she was really, I think, immediately wanted to go into law, wanted to be a lawyer. And that was not a thing any woman had done yet in the United States.
No.
The school was
she's going to have a hard time, isn't she?
Oh, yeah. Everything is a hard time. Let me tell you. Her story is just like barrier after barrier. The school that she went to was extremely strict. Like, they monitored everything kids did, like the students who went there. And so, like, they knew where you went. Like, you were, like, breakfast was at 7 a.m. and then you could do this. And then you could maybe go for a nighttime walk.
What is with, like, early education where it was almost like the same, like, side by side with, like, punishment?
Yes. It was prison.
It was. You're not supposed to like this.
Yeah,
like,
this is hard work. We want to make it feel bad.
Oh my God.
So she would sometimes, though, manage to sneak away. And she would go to attend some traveling speakers, some lectures. So she went to a young lawyer and like immediately was like moon-eyed and was like, I want to be a lawyer. She also was starting to really get into peace, the idea of world peace.
Okay.
Which became an undercurrent for the whole rest of her life. And also the women's rights movement, which at the time was the suffragist movement, which was the movement to gain women the right to vote. So one of the people she went to go see speak was none other than Susan B. Anthony.
Wow.
Who we've all heard of.
Yeah.
Which is why we'll never talk about her. So our whole point is to talk about people you've not heard of. And Susan was very eloquent and very fierce. And the talk was about the need for women to have property rights and the right
she
to vote.
sat up in her chair.
She was like, I know about this bitch. Belva had already experienced some of these injustices that they're talking about, from being denied the right to an education to being paid half the wages of a man to the property rights after her husband died. Thankfully, she had a good father-in-law, but if she hadn't...
Yeah, she would have been fucked.
She would have been fucked. So she had always felt in her core that this was wrong, that there was nothing different from between her and a man, which is why she was so surprised that minister's wife didn't agree with her, because she just didn't expect that women would not feel that way.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of women who
had just accepted it.
Yeah, who were like, no, honey, we are different from men. And that's just not how she felt. She felt in her core that women should be equal. And so hearing Susan B. Anthony was like, yes, I'm not alone, and I'm going to do something about it. So Belva graduated with her bachelor's degree in June of 1857 and immediately got a job she was offered a great job, actually, like recruited to become the principal of a school in Lockport, New York.
That's pretty cool.
The job allowed for her daughter, who's now 7, to come join her. And her younger sister, Inverno, came as well.
Inverno.
She also had a sister whose name was Cyrene. And I love that name.
I wonder what kind of names these are.
Some of these are like Greek.
Okay.
Like, because Cyrene is in Greek mythology.
Okay.
And I love that name anyway.
Interesting.
They had some real weird names.
Yeah.
And then, like, I think her brother was like Wayne. It's like, what? The girls have all these wild
this is
names.
Cyrene. This is Belva. This is
Inverno.
old Chuck over here.
Yeah. Got Jake hanging out.
Cody.
Chad. So she had Inverno come live with them to help take care of Laura. But soon, this was outrageous to me. Belva realized that not only was she not getting the same salary a man in her position would have.
Is he getting benefits?
Like a male principal.
Okay. Oh,
she's
okay.
not even being paid the same as what a male principal is. Not only that, she's actually being paid less than the male teachers that she is supervising.
Oh, crap.
She went to the school board and they were like, sorry, you're a woman. What do you expect?
Oh my gosh.
I would be so fucking infuriated.
So mad. So mad. I already am mad. I'm getting tight in the shoulders.
She was stewing over this. And she had been, she'd already gone to those like lectures by Susan B. Anthony. She'd been sort of like hanging out in women's rights groups and like going to some meetings. And sometimes they were like, when she would go and she'd be like, I deserve to be paid the same as a man in my same job, they would be like, oh, honey, that's a little bit much. That's a little crazy, a little wild. And so she was like having a hard time even finding women's groups who agreed with her. So she was just really feeling like frustrated.
Yeah, I'd feel alone. Yeah.
And I'm feeling very similar to her right now in my own school district, like just feeling like, why aren't we like working harder to be better? So she's feeling that. She went to a teachers convention and ran into Susan B. Anthony again.
How do you that's crazy to me. Oh, just ran into her.
Well, she was selected to be a speaker.
Oh, okay.
So like Belva, I wouldn't say she ran into her. She purposely tried to meet her.
Okay.
And they started chatting, and Susan Anthony was talking to this group of teachers at this teachers convention about the fact that she believed that women were equal in nature and ability to men. This is a very controversial idea. And she was saying to the audience that the education offered to girls and boys should be equal and identical, meaning girls should be allowed to take the same classes as boys. So at this time, that wasn't the case. Girls had to take things that made them good for homemaking. So they would take sewing and they would take cooking.
Yeah, just like we talked about finishing school, of just this is the funnel that they put them through.
Meanwhile, boys took things like public speaking. Girls were not even allowed to take the class. So when Belva is listening to Susan B. Anthony talk about this, she was like, yeah, I want to do this. So she actually approached Susan B. Anthony. She's like, I'm a principal of a school. I get to decide what's taught, besides the school board. So she wanted to offer public speaking to girls in her school. And so she worked out a deal with the school board that said, okay, we'll allow you to let these girls take a public speaking class this one time. But they have to prove that they're just as good as boys at the end of it in order for it to be a class.
So an extra hurdle.
She's like, great. So she taught the class herself.
Nice.
She did not have a male teacher teach it because I think she didn't trust that they would actually teach it
hell
right.
No. Yeah.
So she taught the girls this public speaking class. And at first they really struggled, which I can imagine they would. They're basically being told to be meek, mild creatures that were seen and not heard.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden now, it would be extremely difficult.
Yeah.
You're playing catch up.
It'd be very hard to teach the girls that they were allowed to do what they were doing. But by the end of it, they were just as good as the boys. And the school board agreed that it would now be a required course for both boys and girls.
Nice.
So little by little, she was changing the world that she was living in. But she didn't like the fact that all she was doing was small changes. Did that make a big difference to girls in that school? Undoubtedly. But she wanted to make big change, the kind that made newspaper headlines. And she would. So Belva set her sights on going to Washington, D.C. When she arrived, Belva got a job teaching at a day academy, which left her afternoons open to do whatever she wanted. And what she wanted to do was go to Congress.
Oh.
So she would go...
She wanted to go to the big show.
She went to Congress and the Supreme Court, and they had a ladies' gallery. And so she would sit in the ladies' gallery, and she would listen to the hearings. And she also started attending meetings in the evenings about women's rights and world peace and temperance, which was a big part of the women's rights movement at the time. Mm-hmm. Temperance was prohibition. And there's a really interesting theory that they had at the time, which was that they were noticing a pattern of men drinking too much and then becoming abusive towards women and children.
Okay.
And so they believed we just need to take the ability to drink away from men. Because women weren't allowed to drink. Let's just make it prohibited for everyone, basically, was the idea.
Yeah.
So she was going to these meetings and participating in these groups and demonstrations. They would have some marches, they would do leaflets, they would do things like that. And she's also going to the library and stuff and checking out international law manuals and the manuals for consulars. Those are the representatives who go to other countries and represent the United States. So there was a job opening that came up, which was for the American consul in Belgium. And she thought, why not apply? I know a lot now. I've been watching Congress. I've been reading these manuals. But she turned in all of her stuff. They never even acknowledged her application. They didn't even they were like, what application? Who are you? We wouldn't even accept it.
Whoa.
And she was really embarrassed by that. And just decided not to even acknowledge it. She just was like, I won't even
touch it. Yeah.
But she started to see okay, well, I had the gumption to apply for this job. I actually want to do something. So in 1867, Belva bought the Union League Hall. It was a big meeting hall that had been used for lots of things. So she decided to make it into a one-stop shop. So she had the third floor was her and her daughter's residence.
Okay.
And then in the second floor was her school. She created her own school called McNall's Academy. It became the first school in Washington that was co-ed. It was for
cool.
boys and girls. And then the main floor was a whole bunch of meeting rooms. And it became just this really bustling place. Suffragists, peace groups, temperance groups, students, her family, because also her family moved in.
Keeping it all in one spot.
So she could have everything she wanted. And basically she was in control of it. Right?
Yeah. Well, and be able to manage it well.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that happened was that this organization called the Universal Franchise Association, which had formed in 1867, started meeting there, and she became very involved with them and became the vice president. Their whole goal was to bring the right to vote to everyone, male or female, black or white. That was their goal. At their meetings, people would, because they would make their meetings public so that they could get more people to come and join them.
Yeah, well, I mean, you advertise them so that you have other people out there who are searching, and they see that, and then they go.
Yeah, so they'd have like their flyers or whatever that they would put up on posts and stuff that would say that like their goal as a group is to get the right to vote for everyone, black or white, women or men. And that meant that people would show up to their meetings who are anti all of those things.
Oh, yeah, because they see that and they say, fuck this. And then, yeah, which is, we still see that.
Yes, we do still see that. And it was really interesting because some of the people who would come there specifically to like boo, jeer at them.
How fucking juvenile.
Yep.
Like, I want to talk about boo. It's like,
oh, it got better. They threw rotten vegetables at them.
oh my gosh.
The one that killed me was the fact that some people would like bring tin and then scrape them along the chairs so that it would make too much noise for the speakers to be heard.
My gosh.
Like, talk about toddler behavior.
Yeah, babies do that with their rattles on their cribs.
I'm not listening. I was just like, wow. So that was what they were trying to do, was like drown out the speakers. And the fortitude it must have taken to like get up in front of these people and know this was going to happen to you and continue to speak.
Yeah.
And she did it every night.
And you can't drag those people out of a public forum, can you?
No.
Mm-mm.
So they just had to like sit there and deal with it. And you know, they didn't show up every single night, I'm sure, or maybe they came and like booed everybody for a little while and then got bored and left. But like, it was still something you had to consider would be happening every time you went up to speak. And I just think I would be like, I can't do it.
I would turn by.
Yeah, my legs
would beat somebody up.
See, my legs would just turn to jello and I'd be like, I can't do this. But she just kept on doing it. Not all of the men who showed up were asses, though.
Good.
One of the attendees that came a lot and like found her to be attractive, passionate, and exciting was a very tall, lanky man named Ezekiel Lockwood. By all accounts, he seems like a real good guy. He was one of the first dentists to offer nitrous oxide to help with pain in tooth extractions.
Oh, wow.
And he served as a chaplain during the Civil War, which meant he like helped people with religious stuff during the Civil War. And after the war, he was, I think, really traumatized by the things that he had seen and witnessed and knew had happened during the war. And there were so many men who were not official soldiers who came out and fought and got wounded and things like that. And then the government was like, who, what, me? I don't owe you anything. So he started fighting for those men to get their benefits.
Yeah.
So he seems like a real good guy.
He does.
Belva liked Ezekiel back, and the two of them got married when she was 37 and he was 65.
That's a difference.
It's quite an age difference.
Yeah.
But Ezekiel was not like most men at the time. He was very supportive of women's rights. He believed women should get the right to vote, that they should be paid equally. And when Belva confessed that her deepest desire was to become a lawyer, he agreed that she should. She should do whatever she could to try to become a lawyer. And he said, I'll be the sole provider for the family so that you can focus on studying law. And she'd been the sole provider for her family
for a while.
For a long time.
Yeah.
Since she was 22. She's 37 now. So this is going to be weird for her to step back and let someone else take over. But she did. And she would study law books well into the night and read everything she could. But within the first year of their marriage, she became pregnant with her second daughter, his first child. Her name was Jessie Belva Lockwood. She was born in January of 1869, and Belva called her My Little Blossom.
Oh.
And she, I feel like when she was younger and became a mother, she probably wasn't really ready. And so Laura became like her pal and companion, but I don't know that she had the same maternal instincts that she had now with Jesse.
Yeah.
I can imagine that would be a big difference.
Yeah. And way to go, Ezekiel, 65.
I know, man. Look, you got some swimmers in there. I mean, she's 37.
True.
Like,
both of them.
Yeah, like
cheers.
And it's the 1800s. There are lots of things working against them, and they somehow had a baby. So becoming a mother again, you'd think might have stopped Belva, but not our Belva. She's still pursuing her dreams. So in 1869, she applied to law school. And she heard back from Columbian College soon after her application. And I'm going to read you the actual letter they sent her.
Ooh.
Mrs. Belva A. Lockwood. Madame, the faculty at Columbian College have considered your request to be admitted to the law department of this institution, and, after due consultation, have considered that such admission would not be expedient, as it would likely distract the attention of the young men.
A distraction?
She'd be a distraction. She's a 38-year-old mother.
Oh my gosh. And you know what? The real question should be, why are men so easily fucking distracted? Can't you keep your eyes on your own fucking paper and do your work? Because we somehow know how to do it.
Yeah, I'm like, what? You guys supposedly have the bigger brains? You can't even...
You are end all be all, but a freaking butterfly goes by and you're like, ah!
But a vulva enters the room and you can't handle it? So she actually has pretty good spirits about it. She was like, a middle-aged mother is a great distraction to these young men. Oh, man. She just thought it was kind of laughable.
There's no hope for the future.
She's obviously disappointed, though. She didn't have much time to wallow in this. Instead, she was like, okay, I've got other things that are going on. Because she's involved in the National Women's Suffrage Association, where she got to hear Elizabeth Cady Stanton, another big name in the movement. She got to hear her speak. And Stanton predicted that women would get the right to vote soon and that everyone should take action. They would not, by the way, get the right to vote soon. Lockwood took up the call, and she actually started, because she knew so much about Congress and had been hanging out in these hearings, she started to figure out how to lobby. And lobbying is when you go to Congress people, like individual Congress people, and try to convince them to write legislation, pass legislation, or what have you that supports your cause. So she wanted higher salaries for women who were employed by the government. That's they're doing piecemeal. You can't get the whole bag, right?
No, you got to chip away at it.
So she said women who are doing work for the government should get paid the same amount as a man doing the same job. So she enlisted the help of Tennessee Congressman Samuel Arnell. He proposed legislation to ensure fair pay for women working in government. The bill caused quite a scene, with many people arguing that women should be paid less because it saved the government money.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
I did not like that.
And the government's probably like,
I mean, fair argument. So, in the end, they had to make some compromises, but a version of that legislation passed. So Belva's first attempt at lobbying was pretty successful, and she had also learned a lot about how to convince elected officials to vote the way she wanted them to vote. In the summer of 1870, little Jessie came down with a fever. Despite round-the-clock care, Jessie succumbed to typhoid fever and died.
Oh.
And Belva was devastated. And for a while, she completely closed up, which was very unlike her. When her first husband died, she put her nose down and just kept on going. But this time, she stopped going to meetings for a while, just holed up in her room.
Well, she's grieving. Go ahead and take that minute.
Eventually, she did decide to come out of her sort of fugue state. And she really wanted to do something in Jessie's honor, and that's when she really started pushing a little bit more for the temperance movement, because she believed that it would help children, because there were many children who were ending up in orphanages and things like that because their drunk fathers would murder their mothers, and it was just a really bad situation.
Yeah.
And of course they blamed alcohol instead of holding men accountable for their problems. So she also decided to apply to law school again because there was a brand new school opening called the National University Law School, and they needed students. So they accepted women. In fact, 15 women enrolled so it was her and 14 other women who enrolled.
That's quite a few.
And they were promised when they enrolled that they were going to attend classes like with men in the room.
Yeah.
But on the first day of class,
I knew there was a but.
the women were taken to a separate room. They couldn't go to the lectures with men in the same room. So apparently the male students had thrown a fit when they found out women were going to be in class with them.
Oh my
and
gosh.
so the school was like, all right, we'll move them to another room. Law school was grueling. And most of the other women Belva entered law school with dropped out. Even her own daughter, Laura, who had started with her and was like, I can't do this.
Oof.
But Belva and one other woman, Lydia Hall, stuck with it. And they did well. Belva's many nights of studying law books and all of those manuals had come in handy. As she was approaching graduation, she was giddy about it. Like, I'm going to get a law degree. This is going to be amazing. She envisioned herself walking across the stage and accepting her diploma and joining this very small group of women across the country who had law degrees. But in the weeks leading up to graduation, the school informed her and Lydia that they would not be allowed to attend the ceremony or be given a diploma.
Nothing.
Nothing.
What was the reasoning behind it? Just because they were women?
Yes.
That's it.
Yes.
Okay.
They said basically, you didn't do the same work as the men, so you don't get a diploma.
That is so backwards. Okay.
Belva was like, yeah, you're right. We didn't do the same work. I did more. A further blow, though, is that the way that the system was set up is that if you graduated from a law school in D.C., you were automatically admitted into the local bar association. And that's what was required in order to be able to practice law. You had to be part of the bar association. And if you didn't get your diploma, you couldn't get into the bar.
That's why they did it.
So she could not actually practice law.
That's why they did it. They didn't actually want them to practice law.
That's right. So Belva and Lydia begged for another way to get their diploma. They're like, okay, you say we didn't do the same work, then tell us what we need to do and we'll do it. So they did extra oral examinations. They did this multiple times. There was a special committee set up to decide if they could have their diploma, but it was very clear that they had already talked beforehand and had decided they were going to reject them no matter what. Mm-hmm. And Belva was pissed, and she, in public, in front of them, called them culprits and said they were as guilty as criminals.
Oof.
She was feisty.
Yeah.
Lydia Hall gave up. She was like, I can't do this anymore.
That's what they want. They want to keep stacking that so that they'll eventually not try.
She got married and moved away. But Belva was like, I'm staying right here. Mm-hmm. Just a few months earlier, the Supreme Court of the District of Columbia, not the Supreme Court of the country. It's like, you know how Montana has a Supreme Court, Washington has a Supreme Court. Yeah. So DC is not a state, so it's called the Supreme Court of the District of Columbia. This is important because later on we're going to talk about the actual Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. So the Supreme Court of DC had struck the word male from its admission rules. And so in February of 1872, Charlotte E. Ray had been granted a law diploma at Harvard. We're going to do a mini episode on her. She was a black woman. Howard was a historically black college. Mm-hmm. So she was allowed to get a law diploma before Belva was, which is a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
And therefore she was permitted to join the Bar Association in DC and was allowed to argue in front of DC's Supreme Court. So Belva asked a friend who was a lawyer to help out. So this guy named Francis Miller made a motion to the Supreme Court of DC on her behalf. And she was granted another chance to do an exam in front of a committee.
Okay. For
3 days, all day long, she answered every question that came her way. But once again, she wasn't admitted to the bar. And their reasoning is because she didn't have a diploma.
Okay.
Belva was not allowed. I know. She didn't have a diploma because they wouldn't give it to her. It's just very frustrating.
It is.
So Belva was allowed to practice some law in some places. If a judge was like, I'll allow it, they were allowed
I don't want some of a sandwich. I want the fucking sandwich.
I want the whole ass sandwich. So she was able to represent clients in police court and probate court because those judges had said, fine, you can represent people. But she knew she needed her fucking diploma in order to go any further.
Yeah.
And that's what she wanted. I think
she earned it.
I think her actual goal was to somehow influence legislation through the courts.
Mm-hmm.
And she could not do that if she couldn't argue in front of the bigger courts. So Belva was, in her words, growing, quote, a little bolder and to a certain extent desperate. So in the fall of 1873, she wrote a really long letter to U.S. President Ulysses S. Grant, who also happened to be the president of the law school, the National University Law School that she had gone to school at. So after she sent that long letter, she was like, you know what? That wasn't forceful enough. I need to rewrite that. So she sent another letter, and I'm going to read this one to you.
Okay.
It's a little salty.
Okay.
Sir, you are or you are not president of the National University Law School. If you are its president, I desire to say to you that I have passed through the curriculum of study in this school and am entitled to and demand my diploma. Very respectfully, Belva Ann Lockwood.
There you go.
He never replied to her. However, 2 weeks later, the head of the university gave her a diploma.
Good.
And a week later, on September 24th, 1873, she was admitted to the D.C. Bar Association.
Good.
She was the second woman attorney in the U.S. Capitol behind Charlotte E. Ray to be able to be in the Bar Association. So finally, at age 43, Belva was embarking on a new career.
Good.
That gives me hope.
Gosh. But I mean, imagine all of those shots that she could have just said, I'm done.
Yeah, I mean, the fortitude to keep fighting like that.
Yeah.
That is
not easy.
Whew. I think I would understand why anyone would give up.
When you
like
said
Lydia Hall, I was like, girl, I get it.
Oh, yeah. I just feel like, you know what? It's when there's no hope, you know? I was just, when you said that she was desperate, I just could like picture her in her room, like laying in bed, like I could just burn it to the ground. I could just set it on fire.
Let's burn the whole place to the ground. It's a stapler. So Belva was actually a terrific and successful lawyer. She helped people who were accused of small crimes, big crimes. She also often were helping women in divorces so that they could like have
that's an extremely hard process back then for women.
Yes. And her husband, had that like whole thing about Civil War veterans getting their money. So she started representing a lot of Civil War veterans who were entitled to but were not receiving pensions from the government. Speaking of Ezekiel.
Oh.
He's getting old and his health is declining. And in the winter of 1877, he passed away. After he died, Belva got rid of the Union League Hall. I think it was probably just too much. So Belva bought a new 4-story house in D.C. It had 20 small rooms. It was actually in a not great part of the town, but it was large. And of course, she rented out these rooms.
Oh, yeah.
She made her first floor into the law office. So, of course, her extended family lived with her. Laura had by this point gotten married, so she moved in with her husband.
Of course she did.
And by now...
They're like Mexicans, these people.
And by now her father had died, so her now widowed mother moved in as well. And one of her nieces, whom Belva had adopted after, I think, one of her sisters died. It wasn't very clear about that, but her name was Clara.
Well, they're getting older.
Some of the women who became tenants of Belva's specifically sought out to live in her building because of her fight for women's rights. Mm-hmm. One of those women was Marilla Ricker, and she worked with Belva because she was really super passionate about the fact that Belva became a lawyer, and she was like, I think we need to open the ranks to in other jobs. So the two of them were really fighting for women to be able to become police officers and notary publics. Belva was also in the media a lot. Like at this point, Belva was like constantly in the newspaper. She was becoming pretty famous, especially in DC. Sometimes it was for winning cases on women's rights, for her work in peace or temperance, for demonstrations that she did, like she would, get in trouble for sometimes. But one of those times was when she became the first woman in DC to ride a bicycle.
Really?
It made the news.
I love how that thread of the bicycle has been following us through a lot of our women's stories.
Yeah, because I guess it was just so scandalous.
It was.
Hers was actually a tricycle. It had two big wheels like right next to, so she sat on a bench and then there were pedals in the bench, but this allowed her skirt to be on the bench. And she faced forward. It was just real neat. I saw a picture of it.
Yeah. I think it's just how dare women mount something in public.
Oh, for sure. And, but she had seen all these male lawyers zipping around DC and they were getting everywhere faster and getting their work done. They could turn in briefs faster. She was like, I want to do that.
Yeah.
So she did. And they did a news story about it. Belva wasn't done breaking barriers. She really wanted to represent clients in federal court as well as local court. But when she went before the judges, they told her that a woman couldn't work in federal court. So she hired her own lawyer and fought that policy.
Jeez.
And there's a lot of stuff about this whole situation. Let me just tell you, it took a while. Her case finally made its way all the way through the courts to the Supreme Court of the United States. But the Supreme Court, when they heard the argument, said, you know what, there's nothing that we can do. Because if we made a judgment here, it would set a precedent. And then that precedent would be the law of the land.
That's the point.
Yeah,
that's why you're the fucking Supreme Court.
They didn't want to do that. They said this was the job of the legislature. So now she had to go to Congress and try to get them to pass an actual fucking law.
Yeah.
That said that women could be attorneys in federal court. So she began lobbying congressmen. Mm-hmm. Many members of Congress argued that opening up the ranks to women lawyers could be, quote, an entering wedge for women's suffrage. Yeah, geez, I wonder why. Thankfully, there were enough people in Congress who supported her that she was, in fact, able to change the law. After 5 years of fighting in court and Congress...
5 years.
5 years. The law was signed by President Rutherford B. Hayes. It was now the law of the land that all qualified attorneys could now practice law in federal court.
I love how everybody underestimates her and thinks the Supreme Court could have just said no.
Yeah.
They could have voted and said no, and it would have been turned down. But instead, they wanted her to go over this other hurdle, thinking she would probably give up. And she didn't.
I mean, their decision was no, and here's why. It has to go through Congress. And yeah, I'm sure they thought, well, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But she did it. On March 3rd, 1879, Belva Lockwood returned to the Supreme Court of D.C. Folks gathered to see her. Like, literally, people came and stood out on the street. She was the first woman admitted to argue cases before not only that court, but then the U.S. Supreme Court.
Oh, wow.
She was the first woman allowed to argue a case before the country's highest court. A year after swearing in, she stood in front of the court and presented a legal argument on behalf of a client, making her the first woman lawyer to be heard at the Supreme Court. The story made the front page of all of the headlines.
Oh, yeah.
Now that she had this power and privilege, one of the things I really respected about her is that she was never content to just have it to herself. She was the kind of person who was like, okay, I put a new step on the ladder. I'm going to help somebody up with me.
Good.
So she sponsored Samuel R. Lowry. See, remember we talked about this before, that like if you were a woman or a black person, you had to get sponsored by another attorney who was like a white man in order to be able to practice in federal court or whatever. So she decided to sponsor Samuel R. Lowry to practice law before the Supreme Court. Lowry was the son of a slave and the first Southern black lawyer to seek the right to argue in the highest court of the land. One newspaper said this: "Who dares say the world is not progressing when on the motion of a woman, a black man is admitted to practice in the highest court of the land?" Really appreciated that about her.
Yeah.
I'm sure she wasn't real great on lots of stuff, but I mean, she really did believe in a lot of the tenets of equality. So she was staying busy as a lawyer, but Belva was also doing activist work. She was the featured speaker at the Women's Suffrage Association, and she joined a group called the Universal Peace Union. She also was pushing for the Republican Party. Now, I know that sounds weird to us now, but the Republican Party was, at the time, the group most likely to allow women the right to vote. And so she was pushing that the Republican Party's platform should include women's suffrage as a key tenet. But every time they would propose that to the Republican Party, they would be like, nah, that's all right. We'll pass. So Belva was becoming really irritated because those same people wanted women to campaign for them, to convince the women's suffrage movement and other people associated with that to support those candidates. And Belva was like, no, if you're not going to put that as part of the platform, why should we vote for you?
Yeah.
This meant her and some of the other women in the movement were starting to butt heads, including Susan B. Anthony. When they didn't add suffrage to the platform, she wanted the National Women's Suffrage Association to stop supporting those candidates. And Susan B. Anthony disagreed. So she wrote an open letter to Susan B. Anthony that was published in newspapers across the country.
Really?
And one of the things that Belva wrote in this article this letter was, why not nominate women for important places? If women in the states are not permitted to vote, there is no law against their being voted for. We shall never have rights until we take them, nor respect until we command it.
Absolutely.
Belva wasn't alone in that frustration with the movement. And of course, just as a side note, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton were the reason why Black women were also not heard. They had a very strong grip on what the idea of suffrage looked like, and it did not include Black women. And I think that this was part of the central problem that Belva had, that they were just not progressive enough.
And do you think at the time what Belva saw in Susan B. Anthony was that, we're just going to take these little parts because that's what we need right now instead of fighting for larger, bigger. The big tent wasn't big enough. Yeah.
Belva wasn't alone in feeling this way. And in fact, there was a group of women in San Francisco who had created a new political party, which they called the Equal Rights Party. And they agreed with everything Belva wrote in her letter. And so they responded by nominating her for President of the United States in 1884.
There you go.
She was pretty shocked by this, but she decided that I'm going to accept the nomination. And actually, when she had gone into the U.S. clerk, for a case that she was filing papers on, this clerk was trying to convince her why she should vote for this Republican candidate. And she was support him, not vote for him, because she couldn't vote. She said something like, well, I'm a candidate. Why don't you vote for me? And he started laughing. He was like, that's the best joke you've ever told. And it was after that she was like, I'm going to accept that nomination. Belva wasn't the first woman to announce her intention to run for president, which is why I always thought it was Victoria Woodhull. That's the name I had always been associated. I had associated with the first one to quote unquote run for president.
Okay.
That's actually not true. I didn't realize that. In 1872, Victoria Woodhull had announced that she was going to run for president, but it turned out that she wasn't old enough, and so she never actually was able to run.
Okay.
So this meant that Belva Lockwood was legitimately the first woman to run for president. Woohoo! So Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton were pissed. They were so mad.
Yikes.
They refused to support Belva, and they said that her running for president was a distraction from the movement and made a mockery of what women were fighting for.
Why?
Because they believed that, so part of it is that they knew that the idea of a woman president was so laughable that it was going to make everything they were fighting for laughable.
Okay.
And truly, the newspapers were horrendous to her.
Oh, yeah.
People mocked her all over the place. And one of the things I had left out of my thing, but I'm going to mention, is that there was this group of men called Mother Hubbards. And it was very hard to tell whether or not they actually supported her, or if they were mocking her, or if there was a combination of both. Mm-hmm. But they were these men who would dress up in these Mother Hubbard dresses, which was like these old lady type dresses. And then they would put these giant like frilly bonnet hats on them. And they would talk in like effeminate voices. And one of them would always dress up as Belva Lockwood and like give a speech.
That seems like mocking.
And people would cover that in the newspaper and act as though it was an actual part of her campaign. So that lent itself to more mockery.
Yeah.
However, some of those men, I don't know. It was a very weird situation because like in Indiana, there were a lot of them. And Indiana was the only state where the entire electorate voted for her. So I don't know. It was very weird.
That's very odd.
So the party platform that she adopted as her platform as presidential candidate was free education for all, fighting for pensions for disabled soldiers, increasing wages for men and for women, and the rights of Native Americans to govern themselves. And it opened with this statement: "We pledge ourselves, if elected to power, to do equal and exact justice to every class of our citizens without distinction of color, sex, or nationality." It's a pretty great platform.
Very great platform. Very progressive.
I want to reignite the Equal Rights Party and vote for them. So Belva worked real hard as a candidate. She knew that she wasn't going to win, like her chances were basically zero, but she saw this as a really good opportunity to educate people about what women were really capable of, why women should be allowed to vote, and why there should be equal rights for all and peace.
Even though you're not going to win doesn't mean that you can't put your best foot forward.
And you have a platform.
Yeah.
So the thing about it is because she was a woman running for president, it made her real unique. And everybody came out to hear her speak. Most of them were never going to vote for her. But they wanted to come see this freak woman candidate.
But instead...
And some of them were like, oh, I like her ideas. Oh my gosh, she can actually speak. And in fact, she was such a great speaker that she started to get paid for lectures. So she would do campaign stops and then on the side go do a lecture at like a university or whatever.
Oh, wow.
And people would come pay money to come see her speak. And she was ridiculed in the newspapers and just horrific cartoons made about her. But she was always like, just like water off a duck's back. I don't give a fuck. I just found it really, her poise was incredible. She got a little over 4,000 votes total in the election, and she won all of the electoral votes for the state of Indiana.
Wow.
At this time, elections were extremely corrupt. So if the people in charge of that polling place, like or of that like county or whatever, didn't like a candidate, they would just throw away the votes for that candidate.
Wow.
And that happened to her, in fact, in Pennsylvania. She had a lot more votes in Pennsylvania, but they threw all of them out.
Jeez.
But she actually didn't feel defeated by any of this, because this meant that more than 4,000 men voted for her.
Yeah.
Men who had certainly never considered voting for a woman in their life. And that was a victory.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I've mentioned her peace activism, but I haven't really talked about it much. But she had been really active in the peace movement dating all the way back before the Civil War. Like she was very against the Civil War in general happening. But then once it did, she wanted to support the soldiers who had fought in the war. And so in 1885, she wrote a bill that she presented to Congress establishing an international court to preserve peace in the world. The bill was dead on arrival. Nobody wanted to vote for it. It didn't even it didn't pass committee. But it did garner the attention of the U.S. State Department, who chose her as their delegate to go to Geneva, Switzerland in 1886 for the first World Peace Conference.
Wow.
The organizers actually asked Belva to share the bill proposal to the whole group. And many of the delegates who were there requested copies, and they used her bill as a template for legislation in their own countries. And the following year, Belva represented the U.S. again at the Second International Peace Conference. And from there, she went, so that second one was in Budapest, and then she went to the International Women's Congress in, I think, Paris. So Belva was solidifying herself not only as a force in our country, but across the world. Belva was actually nominated for president again by the Equal Rights Party in 1888, and this time she was a little more bold. Everywhere she went, there was a giant banner. One side said peace, and the other side said women's rights. And those were her two platforms.
Yeah.
She didn't get as many votes the second time around, but she did attract even larger crowds who came to hear her speak. People loved listening to her, and reporters actually called her, quote, an intellectual treat. She was also still lawyering her heart out in D.C. Like, I don't know how she did all this shit. In addition to all these world travels, okay? So in 1891, at age 61, Belva took on the biggest case of her life.
Okay.
This is a big deal. I'd never even heard about this. Jim Taylor was a Cherokee man from North Carolina who came to Belva for help. They had been friends, I think, since the Civil War era, because I think maybe she had helped him get pensions.
Okay.
He felt that he and other Cherokee members were owed a fuck ton of money from the U.S. government. So I'm going to give you a little background on what happened here. Some of this you know. In 1835, I'm going to do it really fast. In 1835, there were about 16,000 Cherokees who lived in the southeastern states of Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia. Only 79 of them signed this treaty called the Treaty of New Echota that transferred the title of their land away to white people in exchange for, quote, new Indian territory in Oklahoma. In addition to the land that they were promised, they were also supposed to be paid $1 million for the land that they were giving up.
Mm-hmm.
However, most of the Cherokee didn't want to move, and they were not part of the 79 who signed away their rights, and they were pissed, and they refused to leave. So then U.S. troops showed up in 1838 and forced them off the land, which we know of in our parlance as the Trail of Tears. About 4,000 Cherokee died on that trail. However, more than 1,000 of them escaped and hid in the Great Smoky Mountains. Jim Taylor was one of them.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1891, when
his name sounds familiar.
Does he?
It does.
I didn't know his name. So in 1891, this is when he is approaching Belva. The descendants of the North Carolina Cherokee had managed to get themselves a treaty that said that they were allowed to work their land legally. So now they wanted the back pay they were owed for the land, the $1 million, plus the interest that would have been gained in that account since the time that they were promised it. And Jim Taylor went to Belva to get them their coins.
Yeah.
So Belva knew that this was a huge case. It was going to take many years to prepare it to go against the U.S. government.
Yeah.
She was defending 3,000 to 4,000 families, so at least 12,000 individuals. She needed to do lots of research, so she was traveling a lot to the South to interview people. And while she was gone, Laura was managing the office. So in 1894, in the middle of this huge case, Laura suddenly dies.
Oh, no.
Yeah, like her constant companion, her best friend. Like they had been never apart.
Yeah.
Except for those 2 years when she went to college. So not only was Belva completely bereft at yet another tragedy in her life, she was also in charge now of helping care for her grandson.
Oh, no.
And he was only 4 at the time.
No.
And only a few years after that, the grandson's father died too, and Belva was his only caregiver.
Wow.
So somehow Belva was able to keep up. Again, she's in her 60s.
Yeah.
And even more incredibly, she was continuing to push and fight. So while she was working on this Cherokee case, she also helped draft a fair inheritance law, which gave married women the right to sue, buy, and sell property, enter contracts, and conduct business.
Wow.
Most importantly, women would also be allowed guardianship of their children unless the husband could prove that she was an unfit mother. And that was signed into law in 1896.
Holy shit.
Like, what?
Yeah. Those are huge.
Huge. Finally, after 14 years of work, the case of the Eastern and immigrant Cherokees versus the United States was heard.
14 years?
14 years of work. It was finally heard by the same judge who 31 years earlier, had told Belva that women lawyers couldn't be admitted to argue in the Court of Claims. However, Belva won her case. On March 20th, 1905, Judge Knott said the United States had, quote, broken and invaded the letter and spirit of the Treaty of New Echota. However, he was like, yeah, they're owed their claim of $1 million, but not that interest. You can't get the interest on it. But Belva was like, I'll appeal.
Yeah.
So the case was argued before the Supreme Court. So she went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court with this case. And a year later, the Supreme Court agreed that the U.S. was liable and all monies should be paid directly to the Cherokee tribe.
Wow.
At 75 years old, Belva had won the largest private claim against the U.S. government for nearly $5 million.
That, like, is not even, like, possible now.
Yeah. Well, actually, they just won a huge case. The Oklahoma case that just went through the Supreme Court.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Jesus.
That grants Cherokee a whole bunch more land.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. So I would love to hear that from Lucas. So this is like 1906. So 1906, she won $5 million for the tribe. What would that be today?
$5 million in 1906 is the equivalent of $146,043,569.75 in today's dollars.
So her cut of that was $50,000.
Whoa.
Yeah. Now, here's a little thing. When Jim first came to her and said, like, this is what we want, this is what we want to do, I don't think either of them thought that they would win.
Yeah.
And if they did, they were probably not going to win the full amount.
Yeah.
And so they had written an agreement with each other at the very beginning that because he brought the case to her, basically he would get paid like a finder's fee type situation where whatever she got, he would get half of it.
Okay.
But then they won $5 million.
Yeah.
And it's 2,000 families or whatever. So it's like a decent amount of money per family.
Yeah.
Put a little pin in that. We're going to come back to it. So in 1909, she was awarded an honorary doctorate at Syracuse University, the place that she'd gone to college.
That's awesome.
And that meant that she was the first woman in the United States to be given an honorary doctorate. You'd think she would have been like, I don't know, let's take a vacation and retire.
Let's take a breath.
But she didn't. She served as a delegate to every international peace conference between 1886 and 1911 when she was 81 years old. She had slowed down in her practice some, but she still had like a few big cases that she would argue every year. The fight of her life was, of course, for women's suffrage. And I have to believe that all she ever wanted was to see that happen in her lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
In 1914, a suffragist organization called the Congressional Union presented a resolution to Congress demanding a constitutional amendment giving women the right to vote. And they asked Belva to come and be a speaker. So at age 83, she spoke at the top of the Capitol steps and marched in with them. Unfortunately, the amendment did not happen that year, or the year after, or the year after that, or the year after that. And as sometimes happens to older folks, Belva was taken advantage of by what people called an unscrupulous admirer. And that person took a lot of money from her in her 80s. And then her friend Jim Taylor died. And his relatives found this agreement that had been signed years and years and years ago where he was entitled to half of whatever she got as her lawyer's fees.
Yeah.
And they came after her saying that she had violated the contract and she owed them $25,000. Well, and it's unclear whether Jim and Belva had come to a different agreement after the settlement, which is very possible, especially because she put in 14 years of work on this case.
Yeah.
And she was like, I don't have this money. Like, this guy had already, like, screwed her out of a ton of money, this unscrupulous admirer. And so she actually went to the public and was like, I need help paying the tribe. Can somebody help me? And people were like, sorry.
Oh, geez.
And so she ended up having to sell her home to pay her debts. Belva argued her last case in court at age 84.
Jeez.
She made her last public message in 1916, which was an endorsement of President Woodrow Wilson for re-election. And she was privately pushing Woodrow Wilson to organize a League of Nations where countries would resolve issues peacefully. That actually failed. And then they went to World War I.
Oh, no.
While Belva never saw the passage of the 19th Amendment granting women the right to vote, she did see women get the right to vote in states and territories across the country. By her 85th birthday, women could vote in 12 states and in the Alaskan Territory. She believed that even though not every woman could vote, it was inevitable to happen. Belva Ann Lockwood died on May 20th, 1978, at age 86. That same year, the House of Representatives endorsed a constitutional amendment granting women the right to vote. It passed in the Senate in 1919 and was sent to the states for ratification. On August 26, 1920, the 19th Amendment was officially approved by 36 of the 48 states. Women had won the right to vote just 3 years after Belva's death.
Oof.
Belva was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame in July of 83, the year I was born, and a month. And she was honored with a postage stamp in 1986. 17-cent postage stamp, though. Her, just saying, they couldn't even give her the full ass stamp. Fought her whole damn life for equal rights.
Oh, just her lot in life.
Yeah, her lot in life was everybody's going to give her a little bit. It's not the full amount.
Nope.
Her accomplishments opened doors to many, many women, including the late Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who wrote the foreword to Belva Lockwood's biography in 2007. So I'm going to leave you, instead of with my words, I'm going to leave you with Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's words on Belva's impact. Throughout her life, Lockwood continued to wear down barriers society placed in women's way. Lockwood was not content to rest on her personal achievements. She sought full political and civil rights for women and became a prominent leader in the suffrage movement. Because of her, women today serve as presidents of bar associations, federal judges, and elective representatives on the local, state, and federal level. Still, the presence of only one woman on the high court bench indicates the need for women of Lockwood's sense and steel to see the changes she helped inaugurate through to full fruition. And of course, we have more than one woman on the high court now, but it's still only 2.
And how long has it been?
Yeah. So.
Oh, incredible story.
Yeah.
Wow.
Incredible.
How do I not know her?
How? I mean, she's like the reason why women workers in the federal government are paid a fair wage. She's the reason why women were allowed to inherit property and buy and sell property. She's the reason why women are allowed to argue in a federal court. She was the first woman to run for president.
Why women could keep their children when men were...
Shitty?
Yeah.
What? How do we not know who she is? Like,
she should have... Did you find any documentaries about her or anything like that?
I did not find a documentary.
She needs a fucking 6-episode documentary.
I agree. And that brings me to my sources, because there is a woman named Jill Norgren who wrote the big biography about her in 2007, which had Ruth Bader Ginsburg write the foreword to, and it's called Belva Lockwood, The Woman Who Would Be President. And then she took that same biography and rewrote it for young adults in 2009, and that's called Belva Lockwood, Equal Rights Pioneer. So I also used another YA biography of her called Belva Lockwood Wins Her Case by Jolene Brown. And then there were 2 small biographies of her in a couple other books. One was called We Shall Be Heard, Women Speakers in America by Patricia Kennedy and Gloria Olshields, and Marching to a Different Drummer, Unrecognized Heroes of American History by Robin Burson. And that's the story of Belva Lockwood.
Good job.
Thank
That was
you.
fucking fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, she's incredible. And also really inspirational to have just never stopped fighting.
No, just the motivation.
And to change careers when you're 43
Yeah.
in a world that tells you you're not allowed to be that thing in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
That's some inspirational shit right there.
It was amazing.
Well, folks, thanks for sticking with us.
Yeah, I really hope you enjoyed this one. This one was very, very educational. I loved it.
Yeah, very educational. Everybody get out on your bike. Go be pleased that you're allowed to ride a bicycle in public. Thank you, Lucas, for editing. He had a real fun time today because we had a street sweeper that interrupted us multiple times.
He'll take care of it.
And thank you to Jennifer Finch for our amazing theme music. Don't forget to visit our TeePublic store and follow us on Patreon.
Thank you so much for listening. Till next time.
Goodbye.